It can be really difficult, but it can also be the most fun and the best years of your parenting.
Dr. Jessica Peck is a pediatric nurse practitioner as well as a professor, author, and mother of 4. Dr. Peck is host of the Dr. Nurse Mama Show, weekdays at 2 p.m. Central, and find her podcast at afr.net.
This is American Family Radio, a listener-supported ministry of the American Family Association.
American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh. A U.S. blockade of Iranian ports is due to begin today after talks aimed at ending the war failed to bring results. Jonathan Savage has more.
According to the Iranian armed forces, this amounts to piracy. The US military says it will stop maritime traffic entering and exiting Iranian ports and coastal areas from 10 a.m. Eastern. It's a response to negotiations over the weekend, which failed to produce an end to the conflict. Yesterday, President Trump said the US Navy will also begin destroying mines that Iranians had laid in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, who was part of the talks, accused the United States of moving the goalposts when inches away from a deal.
Arkansas Republican Congressman Rick Crawford talks about what a successful outcome for the U.S. looks like.
The complete degradation of their ability to produce ballistic missiles, nuclear fissionable material, their ability to enrich, and their ability to make war.
Sexual misconduct allegations against Democrat California Congressman Eric Swalwell have ended his run for governor, as calls increased for him to step down from his seat in the House. Ashley Strohmeyer with more.
Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell says he will end his campaign for governor in California. 4 women accused Swalwell of sexual misconduct and sexual assault on Friday. Swalwell has denied the allegations, quoting them about being absolutely false. Democrats are also calling for the Bay Area congressman to resign his current seat in the House. Some even say they will support expulsion if he refuses to leave.
Gunfire erupted at a Chick-fil-A restaurant in New Jersey Saturday, leaving multiple victims. Fox 5 New York's Stephanie Bertini has more.
Police and yellow tape surrounding this Chick-fil-A in Union Township. The Union County Prosecutor's Office says a mass shooting brought investigators here. Officials confirm 7 people were shot, one of them dead. The Chick-fil-A is located on Route 22, and officials say police responded to the incident around 9 p.m. on Saturday night. Officials say the surviving victims are expected to recover. The investigation is now focused on who is responsible. According to the Union County Prosecutor's Office, this doesn't appear to be random based on the preliminary investigation.
An immigration enforcement advocacy organization is elated that an anti-Israel agitator is closer to being deported from the U.S. Chad Groening has more.
An immigration appeals board has denied Mahmoud Khalil's latest bid to dismiss his deportation case, a largely expected ruling that brings the former Columbia University graduate student to rearrest and possible expulsion. The government says that Khalil's role as a leader of pro-Palestinian protests at Columbia were aligned to Hamas. Khalil became a high-profile hero of the left during the federal crackdown on non-citizens who publicly criticized Israel for responding to the October 2023 Hamas massacre of more than 1,200 Israeli men, women, and children. Ira Melman is media director for the Federation for American Immigration Reform.
Obviously, it is a very good ruling. It indicates, first of all, that if you lie on your applications, that basically voids out whatever visa you came on or an application for a green card.
And Melman says clearly Khalil did that.
He was a frontman for terrorist organizations. He applied to come to the United States as a student under false pretenses. He applied for a green card under false pretenses, and the administration acted correctly. They moved to deport him, and we are one step closer to this saga finally coming to an end.
I'm Chad Groening.
Ohio Republican Congressman Jim Jordan says he's on board with reconciliation to fund certain agencies in the Department of Homeland Security, which has been without money since February. He says there are a number of things Republicans want to do with the legislative tools at their disposal.
We definitely got to do reconciliation to fund ICE. Yeah. We may have to include in there the supplemental to pay our troops, for goodness sake, because Democrats may not want to pay our troops after we've been engaged in this operation in Iran. And then, frankly, I think we also may want to include in that reconciliation package fraud prevention measures.
There's more news available online at afn.net and download the AFN mobile app for your Apple or Android device. I'm Rusty Pugh.
AFA Action takes attacks on the family seriously. The enemies of the family constantly employ new tactics to try to sneak past our radar. They know if we stand together, their evil plans will fail. Your gift to AFA Action allows us to stay vigilant against their onslaught. And if you give this month, you'll receive access to the Cultural Institute video When Your Faith is Illegal by Frank Harbor on AFA Stream as our thanks. You can make your gift today at afaaction.net.
Jenna Ellis in the morning on American Family Radio.
I love talking about the things of God because of truth and the biblical worldview. The U.S. Constitution obligates our government to preserve and protect the rights that our founders recognize come from God, our Creator, not our government. I believe that Scripture in the Bible is very clear that God is the one that raised up each of you, and God has allowed us to be brought here to this specific moment in time.
This is Jenna Ellis in the morning.
Good morning. It is Monday, April 13th, and two major headlines this morning. The first is that Iran talks are done by Tehran's delusions over leverage they don't have, U.S. officials say. Vice President Vance spent 21 hours in talks before leaving Islamabad without an agreement, saying the U.S. made its red lines clear. So the peace negotiations fell apart after Tehran apparently severely misjudged what kind of leverage the regime believed it held, a U.S. official told Fox News Digital on Sunday. And so without a deal, the official said that Vance used the talks to measure the Iranians' own assessment of their position in the negotiations. And Vance found that Tehran thought they held a strong hand going into those negotiations, but added that no deal can be achieved when one party deludes itself into believing they have leverage that in reality they don't have. So what else is new that some in the Middle East regime are delusional? But let's welcome in former Congressman Bob Good. And where does this leave us exactly then with the conflict in Iran?
Well, great to be with you, Jenna. Thanks for having me again. You know, Iran seemed to underestimate the lethality of the American military forces back last summer when the United States and Israel came in and, as the president said, totally obliterated their nuclear capability, overwhelmed them in what was called the 12-day war. They were sort of emasculated, exposed, humbled by their inability to fight back or resist last summer. And then even more so, more recently, while they've shown their ability to be an annoyance and to harm their neighbors and to gum up the Strait of Hormuz and to kind of engage in sort of guerrilla-like tactics, if you will. They have no ability to withstand the U.S. military, but they continue, as you said, to seem to overestimate their strength or their leverage or underestimate the United States, which is incredible at this point they would do that. But I think we find ourselves, that said, you know, we admire the wonderful capability and performance of the U.S. military, and thank God for a president who has put the focus of the military on what it should be, along with Secretary of Defense Hegseth, that it's not a social experiment. It's not about LGBT or DEI or climate or these incredible things that the Biden administration was focused on, but it's on the military's focus on lethality, force readiness, effectiveness, being the most efficient, effective killing machine so that no one wants to challenge us on the world stage. So we're thankful for the performance of the military that's obviously completely overwhelmed Iran, but and thankful for, relatively speaking, while we mourn every loss of life, but we've had very limited casualties in terms of troop deaths, thankful for that. But we find ourselves, I think, to your question, in not really any good options in the sense, do we prolong the conflict? Do we escalate the conflict? Do we stay for an indeterminate period of time? President Trump's kind of been back and forth on regime change or not regime change. Hey, victory, it's over, or hey, we may continue to fight. Will we have ground troops? Won't we have ground troops? So you have a less than desirable option of staying and sustaining whatever's put in place, or do we declare victory and do we leave? And while they've been greatly weakened and decimated, do we allow them to reform or to stay in place? There doesn't seem to be signs of an uprising or an overthrow among the unarmed people, 40,000 of which were killed just a few weeks back at the end of the year. So I don't see a lot of great options for us other than the fact that we have effectively decimated, if not eliminated, their nuclear capability for a while, their ICBMs, missile capability. We've obviously greatly weakened their military. We've reduced their ability to fund their proxies, their terrorist proxies. And you'd like to see there be an overthrow within the country, but I'm not sure that will happen.
So do you think that's enough for the Trump administration to actually just declare victory and say, okay, we're done? Because one of the points, and to me the most significant of the points in the Iranians' proposed peace plan, was that they could still continue to enrich their uranium. So basically they're openly saying that they want to continue to build toward a nuclear program. And then, of course, the control over the Strait of Hormuz has been, a big deal in the news, and people are suggesting that that is really the leverage that Tehran and Iran thought that they had.
Well, the president has called for unconditional surrender, as you know, a few weeks back earlier in the war, that unconditional surrender, which would sort of preclude negotiation. If you're unconditionally surrendering, you don't have any ability to negotiate. And we're trying to seemingly to make a deal with an evil empire, an evil regime, which is incapable of making any kind of honest deal making or keeping a deal. You could never trust those in power not to try to cheat, or if you will, or violate the deal or violate the agreement. They would just be patiently waiting for their next opportunity to attack, trying to secretly enrich the uranium and try to, their ultimate dream objective is to build a nuclear weapon to use against Israel and or the United States. And so I don't know how you make a deal with them. I think the only thing that they understand is strength and overwhelming force, although they're so unrealistic in their grasp of that, even at this point, it would seem. But this is a country, of course, that threatened to use human shields around their civilian structures when the president was saying, hey, we're going to blow up the bridges, we're going to blow up their utilities and their power plants and so forth. And they said, well, we'll surround them with human shields. And then, of course, the president relented and said, hey, negotiations are going to take place and we'll see. But I don't know how you make a trustworthy deal with them. I think the best that we can realistically hope for is you've obliterated their ability to be a threat. But it's going to take people within the country of Iran, which, I've had friends who of Iranian background tell me that they estimate that only 10% of the population actually supports the regime, maybe about 9 or 10 million of the 93 million population there, but they're the ones in power with the guns and the ability to put down a rebellion or a resistance. So we're not left with a lot of great options in terms of what's left behind, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a spot-on analysis. I'm talking with former Congressman Bob Good. And so speaking of Congress, if this conflict continues or escalates, Congress hasn't authorized any of this. And so at what point does this require formal authorization under Article 1 war powers? Because there's been a lot of talk about that as well, and even potential, impeachment of Trump, which they would impeach him over anything. But at what point would Congress need to step in?
Well, while I think it's critically important while the troops are in combat and the bullets are flying and the war is being engaged, that, we're unified behind our troops, behind our president, behind our military, and obviously all praying for victory and for safety for our men and women in uniform. But Congress does need to reassert its constitutional authority in many aspects. The founders, the framers, wisely entrusted the most precious powers, the most important powers in the people's representatives in the Congress. That's the power to tax, that's tariffs and so forth, to send troops into battle, to commit America's young people, into harm's way. And they didn't want it in the power of one individual person. That's greatly, obviously, been violated over decades now, not just by any one president. And we haven't declared war since World War II, and that's the last time when we had an overwhelming victory. It was the last time that we declared war. So you're coming up to your point on the 60 days. We're about 2 weeks out from the 60 days where the law requires for Congress to weigh in on the conflict. And so I hope that Congress will appropriately assert itself in that respect, not in a way where they're threatening to cut off funding while the president is the commander-in-chief, where he has the constitutional authority to execute war, to carry out the war. He's supposed to do it with authority from Congress unless he's, deterring an immediate threat, that we've been attacked or there's an imminent attack or that sort of thing. But to carry on an ongoing conflict is constitutionally supposed to require the people's representatives to weigh in. The ones who are accountable to people have to come back every 2 years and ask for their vote, and through which the people can express their wishes. And a significant conflict ought to have the country, as reflected through the people's representatives of the Congress, behind it. And so, but this needs to be, Congress needs to take action before the next conflict. You seem to have a reaction to this when a conflict ensues, whether it's whatever president might be or the current conflict. But the Congress needs to assert itself before the next conflict and to affirm its constitutional power to declare war, to commit troops into battle, to be consulted with at least, and the president to come and make the case to Congress before we would have a prolonged conflicts at a significant level.
Yeah, and that's such a great advice. And Congress, there are a lot of things that Congress needs to reassert in terms of its constitutional authority and not just simply, it seems like, either turn a blind eye or just delegate to the executive or to other agencies. And it's really frustrating to see that there are so many other things that Congress is focused on besides actually doing its job. But that gets me into the second major headline, which I'd love your comment on, Bob Good, which is Eric Swalwell. So he, the utter brutal, quick takedown from the Democrats has actually been very impressive. So they're basically Me Tooing him, which should have come a long time ago, but he got away with everything that he was doing because he was valuable to the Democrats and they protected him. Now that he is no longer useful on the California gubernatorial ballot, they're calling for him to suspend his campaign, which he just announced last night that he is suspending his campaign for governor. He says, "To my family, staff, friends, and supporters, I'm deeply sorry for the mistakes and judgment I've made in my past. I will fight the serious false allegations that have been made, but that's my fight, not the campaign's." But apparently, the allegations are serious enough that it warrants suspending his campaign in California, but not so serious that he's considering or that Democrats are calling for him to resign from Congress. So it's really clear, I think, what's going on here is that the Democrats, with California's a way that they select the top two candidates, regardless of party in the primaries, the really wide field of the Democrats, they're trying to consolidate. And so they just want to get Eric Swalwell off the ballot. But are they going to keep him in Congress?
It'd be interesting to see. It's bad when the party of no morals, no standards, the party of sexual deviance, is calling on him, as you noted, they call on him to leave the California governor's race, perhaps only pragmatically so because they wanted to winnow the field a little bit, as you noted. But you are beginning to see him lose support in Congress. The congressional leadership, all three of the congressional leaders, called on for an investigation. You're seeing Democrats, as you noted, calling for him to leave the gubernatorial race. But this is a guy who has obviously apologized to his wife for his moral failings, apparently. This is the guy who had the reported allegations that he was having an affair with an alleged Chinese spy previously. This is a guy who's saying he needs to take time, to kind of repair things with his family. But you had 50 of his former staffers have called on to resign in a letter to Congress and for a full investigation. The allegations go, beyond the sexual harassment and unwarranted, inappropriate advances in behavior, and apparently include what could be considered rape based on the allegations that have been recorded from, the San Francisco Chronicle. And so it's very serious. And perhaps he's simply trying to defend. He's worried about his alleged criminal culpability beyond his political situation, his political survival. I think you're going to see a groundswell build for him to resign from Congress. I think if Democrats only trying to protect themselves politically, I think that maybe they'll try to negotiate and pair that with the removal of perhaps Tony Gonzalez as well. But I think if there was a vote to remove Eric Swalwell from Congress, I think he would lose that vote right now. You'd only need about a third of Democrats to join all Republicans to vote to remove him. And Ana Luna seems determined to bring that, to force a vote to that effect. And you've had even Jayapal, the very liberal congressman, Jayapal has said that she would vote to remove him. I've seen reports to that effect.
Yeah, and so do you anticipate that will actually happen when Congress is back? And there have been calls, as you mentioned, to remove not just Eric Swalwell but also Gonzalez and also Corey Mills out of Florida for unfortunately very similar types of accusations, as well as I believe some other financial issues as well related to campaign finance and so forth. But is this going to be perhaps maybe one fell swoop where, because there are Democrats and Republicans, that this may be one thing that both sides kind of unite in and say, okay, we'll get rid of our guys if you get rid of your guys as well?
Well, and there's suspicion, to your point, that Sheila Sheriffless McCormick, who's also got her own allegations of ethical and campaign and finance violations and things like that. And while I think you might be right that there may be a negotiated 2 and 2 or 1 and 1, they really ought to be held accountable on their own merits, assessed independently. And and while all the aforementioned, there's obviously concerns and there may be warranted action for all of it. And frankly, the Constitution gives Congress the authority to determine who their members are, in terms of Congress can vote out a member for any reason they want to vote out a member if 2/3 agree to do so. So they certainly can be held accountable, at least professionally and politically, by Congress. But I do think they ought to be assessed on their own merits or lack thereof, their own culpability, their own violations, rather than negotiated in. Well, we want to remove this one, so let's throw this one in too. Because they ought to stand or fall, if you will, on their own merit or lack thereof. But I suspect you might be right that in order to try to get action taken, that you might have a combination.
Yeah, I agree with you that it shouldn't just be a political calculation and that kind of a negotiation, but each member should be considered on his or her own merit or lack thereof, and that would be fair. But that would be probably too reasonable and rational for Congress, because it seems like everything is at least quasi-political in terms of the calculations of any sort of accountability. But I hope that that Swalwell and I think Corey Mills is absolutely deserving of expulsion as well. And when people stand or fall on their own merit, it should matter what the facts are, not just the allegations. We don't just believe all accusers, obviously, as the whole Me Too movement suggested, but to actually do the fact finding, but to be impartial. And it shouldn't matter whether they have an R or D after their name. It should matter what the facts are and what proof there actually is of these types of allegations. But Congressman Bob Good, really appreciate it. We've got to go to break here, but tell us about your podcast and where people can find that.
Thank you for letting me mention that, Jen. Appreciate what you do. Good for America is the podcast. It is on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple, wherever you find your favorite podcasts. And so we'll be talking about these issues and more this week and beyond. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, I'll be listening because you are one of my favorite political commentators, and I always appreciate your wisdom and advice. And I wish that you were still in Congress, but perhaps you'll live to fight another day in that one. But Bob Good, really appreciate it. You can follow him on X and, of course, listen to that podcast, and we will be right back with more.
They're coming for your family, not with guns, not with armies, but with laws, with lawsuits, with ballots and bureaucrats. Parental rights are under attack. Marriage is being redefined. Your values, they want them silenced, and they're counting on you to do nothing. But here's the thing, we're not backing down. I'm Walker Wildman, and AFA Action is in the fight, in the legislature, in the courtroom, and at the ballot box. We're stopping bad legislation, we're challenging activist judges, and through iVoter Guide, we're helping Christians vote like it matters, because it does. Thousands of families are already standing with us, and I believe the American family is still worth fighting for. But we can't do it without you, and we need your help today. Visit afaaction.net right now. Give today. Join us on the front lines, because the other side isn't slowing down, and neither can we. afaaction.net. Your voice, your values, your vote.
This is Abraham Hamilton III with AFR, and we're sending Bibles. Here's Michael with Bible League International.
Millions of Christians around the world in places like Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America are denied God's Word. Can you sense the desperation in the voice of this pastor in Africa?
We have a great need. Christians with Islam do not need food, but they are crying out that we give them the Word of God. Whoever comes and is able to give us a Bible, it will be a great blessing.
A passionate plea from Pastor Duesi, who 40 years ago lost dozens of family members to the Ethiopian famine. He's not denying there's a need for physical nourishment, but he's saying that Christians in his part of the world, they need the spiritual nourishment that comes only from the Word of God. They're desperate. They're crying out today. It's only $5 to send a Bible. $100 sends $20. Every gift will be matched. We want to do that for $4,000 this month, and it happens with every gift today. Abraham?
You can give by calling 800-YES-WORD, 800-YES-WORD, or visit sendbiblesnow.org. That's sendbiblesnow.org.
Hello, Americans. I'm Todd Stern. Stand by for news and commentary next. One of the worst-kept secrets inside the Beltway is the America First movement has been overrun by grifters and freeloaders, a good many making the pilgrimage to Mar-a-Lago hoping to line their pockets and kiss the golden ring. They saw the populism of President Trump as an opportunity to make fast money, many of them raking in millions of dollars, perpetrating a scam on good-hearted conservatives. Now, look, I'm not going to name names, but you know who they are. This band of bluster intentionally trying to sabotage the president's agenda. Modern-day Benedict Arnolds. And for what? More clicks, more engagement? I don't know. Maybe, just maybe, they're lining their pockets with big dollars from Islamist countries. As for me, I'm with Trump all the way. The man took a bullet for the country. The least we can do is show the man some respect. Instead of invoking the 25th Amendment, I'm calling on my fellow citizens to invoke the unsubscribe button on their podcast. I'm Todd Stearns.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. Well, amidst all of the more important, perhaps, headlines, or at least the ones that mainstream media would like you to pay attention to, kind of quietly in the background, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is still chugging on as the U.S. Secretary of Health and Human Services and leading the Make America Healthy Again MAHA movement. And I think overall, I mean, obviously, Iran and that conflict, very important, looking at the midterms upcoming, very important. I mean, all of these things that we have to consider kind of in the short term, very important. But overall, as sort of the signature initiatives of the second term, for a long-term projected benefit to the United States, I think that the Make America Healthy Again movement and the DOGE movement, which has basically, all but concluded. Both of those things were set to be the signature initiatives of Trump's second term. And if implemented well and actually causing a lot of change for good, could have significantly, and maybe still can, significantly impact how America lives day to day. And so I saw, because I'm on Instagram, of course, and I follow all kinds of, different people, not just politics, but also, culture and home design, interior stuff. I mean, all kinds of things. And so once in a while, things will pop up in my feed on Instagram that's interesting. And this was from a coach named Dan Go. And he said, I had a client who suffered from mental health issues for years. We had him get some sun, lift weights, get 10,000 steps a day while dropping 25 pounds of fat. Brain fog was eliminated. Intrusive thoughts disappeared. It turns out he wasn't mentally unhealthy. He was metabolically unhealthy. And this was fascinating to me. And so I want to ask our next guest, Raw Egg Nationalist, who we always invite on to talk about things about health and nutrition and, some of these things, because this may be a fascinating correlation to what we're seeing in terms of a rise, not just of, some of the obvious things that RFK Jr. wants to target, like chronic disease and some of these things, but what we've seen over the last just several decades, and I think even over the last decade, of very severe mental health issues of people who are committing all kinds of very violent crimes. And it seems like there is just in density and the data a rise in issues that are attributed to mental health, and even going so far as then claiming, that some people are not competent to stand trial, like the murderer in the Irina case, she was a young woman from Ukraine who was stabbed just randomly on that public transportation train. And the court is saying, that he's mentally incompetent to stand trial due to mental health reasons. But could there be a correlation between how absolutely terrible our food supply is, what we eat, the lack of vitamins, the lack of just taking care of our physical bodies, that it's not so much actually a mental health issue, but it's a metabolic health issue? So, Raw Egg, thanks so much. And, what are your thoughts on this overall? Because I found this topic really fascinating.
It's great to be back with you, Jenna. So, this really is a fascinating topic, the relationship between mental and physical health. We can be quite cynical about the past. We can look down on the ancients, people in the Middle Ages and even back to classical times. But actually, the ancients, the Greeks and the Romans, recognized very well that there was a fundamental relationship between the health of the mind and the health of the body. So there's the very famous Latin formula, mens sana in corpore sano, healthy mind in a healthy body. They fundamentally understood that the two things were linked. You couldn't have a healthy mind without a healthy body, and vice versa. And so, physical cultivation was an essential part of life in the classical world, the gymnasia, the palaestra, the wrestling school. It's not for nothing, actually, that, a lot of the great philosophers of ancient times, Socrates, for example, Plato, they were physically cultivated men. They were strong men. Plato, which was actually the philosopher's nickname, meant broad shoulders. He was a wrestler of some, great skill. He was quite a formidable physical presence, as well as being one of the greatest philosophers, of ancient times. But I think since then, we've actually lost a sense of, for various different reasons, we could speculate on them, but for various different reasons, we've forgotten this fundamental wisdom that actually really is very, very obvious to you if you've ever undertaken a serious program of exercise. So many people who suffer brain fog, anxiety, depression, if they start working out, suddenly they discover that these things disappear. It's like, oh, I didn't need to take any medicine. Actually, all I needed to do was start using my body. So there's a lot of scientific research as well that goes along with this, renewed emphasis perhaps on the relationship between the mind and the body. So we're starting to discover, for example, that there is such a thing as a gut-brain axis. And what that means essentially is that there is a fundamental relationship between the gut and the brain. And gut health is fundamental to mental health. And our guts are under assault in the modern world, from pharmaceuticals, from processed foods and food additives, from herbicides and pesticides. One of the ways that people, are really starting to reclaim their mental health actually is to take seriously what they eat, as well as exercise. What you eat, what you put in your stomach, how you treat the billions and billions of tiny little microorganisms that live in your gut that are fundamental to your hormonal health, your metabolic health, your mental health. that really does make a difference. So, I mean, this isn't a meme. There's no way that this is just a meme. This is something actually that we should take very, very seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. And it stands to reason and common sense that when you are more active, you feel better. When you get better sleep, you feel better. When you eat right and healthy, you feel better. When you are, and it's not just a matter of weight, but overall health. And obviously, when you're at a weight that you should be, and then you feel better. I mean, all of these things that go into making sure that our physical bodies are healthy, that does ultimately affect how we feel emotionally, the brain fog that this coach was talking about, all of these things. And, the kind of correlation that I was thinking about as well then, Raeg, when we look at the last several decades of how big pharma has infiltrated, and instead of going back to some of these holistic remedies, they want to just throw medication at it to really for a bottom line of having a multi-billion-dollar industry. And then you look at the food supply, you look at all of these things that are keeping people feeling terrible, frankly. It keeps them more sedentary, so then all they do is watch TV or play video games, and it impacts their overall will to be productive, and in many cases, it facilitates more dependency on government. And in some cases, I think an argument could be made, as this coach is making, that some of the mental health issues that are attributed to mental health are actually an issue of overall physical health. But it seems like, other than RFK Jr., it seems like the government is almost trying to design our environment and our overall lifestyles to keep us suppressed so that we aren't as productive and we aren't as interested in individual rights, freedom, and liberty, and doing all these things, but to be more dependent on the big pharmas and big government and ultimately government welfare.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's absolutely no doubt that illness is big business. Big pharma doesn't exist to address the underlying causes of ill health. Big pharma companies exist to produce the best possible return for their shareholders. And the model for that, obviously, is to sell people pills and to sell people ad hoc remedies that they need to keep using. And you only need to look at these new weight loss drugs, Ozempic, for example. It's already been admitted that users of weight loss drugs are going to have to stay on them probably for life if they want to keep the weight off. So that's one way of addressing the obesity crisis. And there is a crisis. 70% of Americans are either overweight or obese. We are talking about an epidemic of obesity. That's one approach. You give them a drug, they take it for life. Novo Nordisk, Eli Lilly, all these huge companies make tens and hundreds of billions, maybe even trillions of dollars over the course of decades from, hundreds of millions of people being overweight. Or there's a different model, which is actually you empower people, you give them the ability to look after themselves, to exercise personal responsibility, you give them access to good food, you clean up the environment, you educate people from a young age, from school, you show them what real food is and what bad food is, and you show them the benefits of exercise. But that's actually like you say, that is a model, I think, of citizenship, of individual freedom that is increasingly at odds, I think, with the way that nations are governed, with the kind of very tight nexus that you see between government and big pharma, and that was obviously so clearly on display during the pandemic, when you had big pharma scientists essentially dictating how much freedom you could have for a period of years, locking you in your own home if you didn't have a vaccine, if you weren't prepared to social distance and wear a mask. It's Robert F. Kennedy Jr. really is bucking the trend, I think, over the last 6 or 7 decades. But he's facing a very, very serious uphill task, and it's much, much easier for government just to accept the big pharma model, not only because it generates money and there's a certain amount of corruption or a large amount of corruption, but also actually because dependency does benefit governments in very many fundamental respects. It certainly benefits leftist government and sort of socialistic government that wants people to be dependent on the state, that wants people to have their hands out, ready to be dispensed food and medicine by the government, and to be dependent in pretty much every single aspect. So, yeah, I mean, we are talking about fundamental issues that cut to the very heart of the type of political community that we live in and the kind of political community that we want to live in. I mean, I really want Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to be successful, but he is facing a huge uphill battle.
He is, and this is where I wish that Trump would focus a little more on some of these things, and hopefully he's giving RFK Jr., as much as he can, of course, the leeway to implement a lot of these significant changes, but he is facing an incredibly uphill battle, and I hope that Maha doesn't eventually kind of go the way of Doge, which just ran into a wall where the elitists and the Uniparty of DC just didn't want to make any sort of cuts in spending, and they didn't want accountability for corruption and all of those financial disclosures and things that Doge uncovered. And the Maha movement similarly is running into a lot of those kind of blockades. So where is it at right now as, we're in mid-April of 2026, and what do we hope are the significant wins? As you've said frequently on this program, this is going to be much longer. As successful as RFK Jr. could be, this needs to be a decades-long kind of movement. So we're not going to solve everything just in this Trump term.
Yes, no, I mean, this is something that I try to hammer home. Maha has to be a generational agenda. It's taken the better part of a century, really, for Americans to become the most unhealthy nation on earth. You're not going to undo that in a 4-year presidential term. You can say that, but that's just a soundbite and an empty promise. And I know that RFK Jr. knows that this is going to be a decades-long agenda. He's had some very high-profile wins, I think. He's been able to, particularly his stuff with the vaccines, I think. So changes to the vaccine schedule, changes to the recommendations for the COVID vaccines. Those have been good, and he's also done something very, very fundamental, I think, by turning the food pyramid upside down. The food pyramid was a monstrosity, really, as it existed, and he's turned it upside down on its head, re-emphasized the importance of consuming high-quality animal foods. I mean, that's fantastic. That really is a fundamental change. That is a reversal of decades and decades of terrible, terrible nutritional science and bad advice that has made people as unhealthy as they are today in America. But there are still some big issues that need to be tackled. And one of them, I think, is pesticide and chemical regulation. So we saw a little while ago, I forget exactly when, it was at least sort of a month, maybe 2 months ago, this executive order from Donald Trump about glyphosate, about bringing manufacturing of glyphosate back to the US and China, and also providing immunity for manufacturers. Now, it was justified as a strategic intervention to protect the US food supply. And that may very well be the case. The US food supply is dependent on the use of glyphosate, as it is. But that was really seen as a fundamental betrayal of the Maha movement. Largely, and I think that was correct. I mean, RFK Jr. has campaigned for decades about the harms of glyphosate. Glyphosate is this ubiquitous herbicide that's sprayed all over the US, but particularly on crops in the Midwest, corn and soy, GMO varieties particularly, and it's horrible. I mean, it's one of the nastiest agricultural chemicals there is, and it's everywhere, and it's causing all sorts of harms. It's implicated in pretty much every kind of chronic disease you can imagine. And yet here we are. We've just had the manufacturers of glyphosate given immunity from the harms caused by the product. That's the opposite of what RFK Jr. wanted. I know it's very hard for him to swallow. He did have to kind of come out in support of Trump and say, look, yeah, this is necessary now, but we'll try and do something about glyphosate in the future. So there is an issue about chemical regulation, about pesticide regulation, about chemicals like glyphosate. We do need to see more movement to get these chemicals out of the food supply and out of the environment. But again, RFK Jr. is facing this enormous uphill battle. We're talking about massive vested interests. Glyphosate is worth billions upon billions of dollars to big ag and big chemical. And it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy. There are really serious battles to be fought.
Yeah, or on the state level as well, because that's a big battle that here in my home state of Florida, the Surgeon General and the First Lady and the Make Florida Healthy Again movement is trying to battle as well. And I think the more people that focus on that and the more call and kind of grassroots groundswell, hopefully then there will have to be some addressing of it. And, the big ag and big pharma can't just get away with all of this. But Raw Egg, really appreciate it. You can follow him on X. And, all of these things are so important and just reminds us to make the best decisions for our overall nutrition and health that we can. And we will be right back with more.
Looking to take the next step in your education? Blue Mountain Christian University offers graduate degree programs designed for working adults who want to grow professionally and personally. With graduate studies in business, education, and kinesiology, BMCU combines academic excellence with a Christian worldview. With flexible and hybrid formats and supportive faculty, you can pursue a graduate degree while balancing work, family, and calling. Learn more at bmc.edu.
Fostering and adoption is not a Band-Aid for infertility. It is a calling, and God can change the desire of your heart and make that so rewarding. It's the most beautiful, selfless thing. It's pure religion, but it's not a fix to I desire biological child. God has to deal with that in your heart separately.
Hannah's Heart, encouraging couples through infertility and miscarriage. Saturdays, 4 a.m. Central on AFR or on the AFR app.
What if healthcare could be more than bills and bureaucracy? What if it could reflect faith, foster community, and offer spiritual support? At Redeem Health Share Ministry, the mission goes beyond medical bills. It's about honoring Christ and embracing healthcare that aligns with Christian values. Redeem members share medical expenses through monthly contributions, supporting one another in a Christ-centered community. It's not insurance, it's believers helping believers through financial support and prayer. And Redeem Health Share provides freedom for members to select the doctors, hospitals, and treatments that are right for them. No networks, no restrictions, just faith-driven care. From everyday checkups to unexpected medical emergencies, Redeem offers flexible programs and encouragement rooted in Scripture. Because your health care should reflect your faith, not compromise it. More at redeemhealthshare.org or call 1-844-REDEEM-0.
The following is a real-life story from Trinity Debt Management.
I had a lot of credit card debt, and it stressed me out. But what I thought was a solution turned out to be a problem. I kept hearing ads about debt settlement that seemed too good to be true. And actually, it was. When I called, they told me to stop paying my bills. That didn't sound right to me at all, so I hung up. Later, I found out that debt settlement is bad, real bad. Then I learned that there is a right way to pay off your credit cards. It's called a debt management program from the great team at Trinity. Trinity had a plan. In the end, I paid off my bills, I saved thousands, and I even improved my credit score.
If credit card debt has you down, call Trinity at 1-800-788-1813.
My name is Heather. Please forget debt settlement and remember Trinity Debt Management.
1-800-788-1813.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. Well, Donald Trump is, of course, in the news for many, many reasons, and including yesterday a kind of lengthy rant on Truth Social calling out Pope Leo. He said Pope Leo is weak on crime and terrible for foreign policy. He talks about, quote unquote, fear of the Trump administration, but doesn't mention fear that the Catholic Church and all other Christian organizations had during COVID when they were arresting priests, ministers, and everybody else for holding church services, even when going outside and being 10 and 20 feet apart. He goes on then, and it's a pretty lengthy rant, so we don't need to read the whole thing, but basically he points out, I think correctly, that Pope Leo is more liberal, and it's interesting that he is calling out Pope Leo, and of course the Democrats are finding fault with that. As Senator Mark Kelly posted, as a Catholic, I find it abhorrent that the President of the United States would publicly attack a successor of St. Peter. Donald Trump is flailing. All right, well, then meanwhile, USA Today had a piece this morning that asked the question, and this is what I found interesting: Pope Leo for president? ? A meeting with Obama guru sparks speculation. So a Chicagoan leader having a closed-door meeting with Democratic strategist David Axelrod in the spring before the year's midterm elections is usually seen as a playbook for a big announcement. Pope Leo's reported confab with the former senior advisor to former President Barack Obama on April 9th stoked all sorts of speculation. Was the pontiff going to formally meet with the 44th president or announce a new communication strategy? So, or maybe, as some eyebrow-raising posts on social media jokingly teased, foreshadowing a possible papal presidential run, because he is an American, so that's possible. But let's welcome in Tony Ortiz, who's the founder of Current Revolt, and I don't think we will be seeing that kind of conflation of church and state anytime soon. At least I hope not. But it's really interesting to see how Trump is really focused, I think, on this particular pope, kind of more than he seemed to be previously.
Yeah, and it's a bit unhinged. As a Catholic myself, I think it's a bit inappropriate. I think it would behoove the president to probably focus on other things than kind of this issue. I mean, the Pope's going to do what the Pope does, right? And the president should focus on his task as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's for. A lot of people have tried to tell President Trump that, but of course, he's going to also do what he's going to do. But, this is where when the Pope does engage in commenting on the propriety of war, and, this kind of all started with his tweet, which as a Protestant and as an evangelical, I took issue with, not just, as a non-Catholic, but just from someone who's actually read the scriptures for myself, and to suggest, as the Pope did, that no wars are just, and literally said God doesn't bless war, is just patently not true from the Bible. And I think a lot of people took issue with that. Of course, Trump took issue with it more personally because it was related to the conflict in Iran. So, is that necessarily a good strategy of the Pope to comment on those? I mean, he's going to, of course, but then that's going to invite this sort of criticism.
Yeah, and you're 100% right, and I would agree. I think the Pope is kind of, in a sense, asking for the arguments, and for anybody who's followed President Trump long enough, if a big enough figure makes a comment on something or is slightly critical of the president's actions or decisions, you're basically inviting him to engage. And so, yeah, I would disagree with the Pope here too. That there is good justification for specific wars, and people could argue whether or not this war specifically that we're in with Iran is justified or not. But like you said, he's basically inviting criticism by engaging, and I think he obviously has the right to comment on it, but I don't think his comments there are very well thought.
Yeah, I agree with you. And so, what about this kind of speculation that because he's an American, I mean, technically he could run for president. I mean, there's not, unless, the Vatican has a rule otherwise, that's a potential. I don't think that that's a likely outcome, but it was actually interesting that USA Today, of all places, was putting that out there as speculation.
Yeah, I was under the understanding that Catholic doctrine prohibits their figureheads like the Pope from running for office. I may be mistaken, but I don't see it happening. If anything, I can see maybe this Pope getting more political than normal, and maybe, I don't know, doing a Democratic run with somebody or being seen at events with somebody, especially if he feels he needs to be involved in these sort of discussions. But as far as actually running for office, I don't believe, I could be wrong, believe that the Pope is allowed to run for office.
Mm-hmm. So he'd have to maybe step down as the Pope to then go and run for office, which, it's 2026. Stranger things have happened, so we'll see. But
right.
But speaking of strange things, in the last few minutes of this segment, I wanted to get your comments, Tony Ortiz, on what we're seeing with the brutal takedown of Eric Swalwell. I spoke with former Congressman Bob Good earlier in the program. And, to me, this just smacked of a clear takedown to take Eric Swalwell out of the governor's race in California to kind of consolidate that field, because currently the two Republicans, Chad Bianco and Steve Hilton, are polling at the top, and the state's unusual top two primary system could allow only two Republicans to reach the November general election ballot. And it seems just really obvious that this is where the Democrats are focused.
Yeah, I mean, two things could be true at the same time, right? Like the timing is convenient, and it's clearly like a timed hit piece or timed attack against Swalwell. And the potential that these allegations could be true. And they've just been sitting on them, right? You see it a lot in politics. This is nothing new as far as, people sitting on oppo or sitting on incidents until the right moment. And, if I recall correctly, I believe the first incident happened in 2019, and then the other one, just a couple of years ago, allegedly. And then you've got all these women coming forward at the same time. So it could be, a consultant that was sitting on this oppo and decided to pull the trigger on it, or it could be that these women genuinely felt that that Swalwell was getting too much power, and they decided to come forward to take him down. But I totally agree. It does seem the timing is convenient, as they say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's really fascinating too that someone like Swalwell, who during the Kavanaugh confirmation was posting, and of course we still have all of those posts of believe all women and believe all accusers, and now he's sitting there calling them false accusations, and of course when he's the one who's being accused, and so there's a lot of hypocrisy going on. But this was also interesting from Christina Pushaw, who works in Governor DeSantis's office. She was responding to a tweet from Katie Porter, who is also running for governor in California, who said the allegations against Congressman Swalwell are horrifying. I'm thinking of the courageous women who've come forward to share their stories. We believe you. We stand with you. Christina responded, if we are believing the women who accuse Swalwell of sexual misconduct, which I do, we should also believe the man who accused Porter of domestic abuse. I know this is a controversial thing to say, but California deserves better than these two psychopaths. I tend to agree with that.
Yeah, and this is common with almost exclusively with the Democratic Party, but you're starting to see it with Republicans too, where they're hypocritical, like you said. They say believe all women and this, and they support women and we're feminists and all this stuff, and then on the other end, when they get accused of sexual assault or degenerate behavior, all of a sudden they're either quiet or they're very dismissive. So yeah, I agree with her as well. We should look at all these allegations. They should be investigated, and it should be a verify sort of situation rather than really taking action on anything. And in the United States, people are innocent until proven guilty, but these allegations do deserve to be investigated.
Yeah, absolutely. And they should stand or fall on their own merit. I mean, just as former Congressman Bob Good was saying earlier in the program, this shouldn't matter whether it's a Democrat or a Republican when it comes to criminal allegations particularly and especially, but even congressional expulsion. I mean, they should stand or fall on their own merit, but they deserve to be investigated where there are credible and serious allegations, regardless of how much power each of these individuals purport to have within their own party. But Tony Ortiz, we're already out of time, but really appreciate your comments. You can follow him on X, the founder of The Current Revolt. You can also follow that publication as well. And as always, you can reach me and my team, Jenna at afr.net, and more news coming your way tomorrow morning.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast may not